Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that some of the most important decisions in your life didn't begin with you. Not your favorite foods, not your daily habits, maybe not even some of your biggest choices. At first, that sounds impossible. You experience every decision from the inside. You feel yourself thinking, comparing options, and choosing. So, how could those decisions not be yours? Here's where things get strange. In a famous neuroscience experiment, researchers monitored brain activity while participants made a simple choice, like pressing a button whenever they wanted. The surprising result? The brain showed signs of preparing the action before participants became consciously aware of deciding. For a brief moment, the brain seemed to move first. And that creates an uncomfortable question. If the decision starts before you become aware of it, what exactly is consciousness doing? Maybe that only applies to trivial choices. After all, pressing a button isn't the same as choosing a career, starting a business, or ending a relationship. Fair point. So let's look somewhere else. Imagine walking into a supermarket to buy milk. 10 minutes later, you leave with cookies, chips, and a drink you never intended to purchase. Why? Because companies spend billions studying how small details influence behavior. The placement of products, the lighting, the music, the colors, even the smell in a store. In one experiment, shoppers exposed to French music were more likely to buy French wine. When German music played, sales shifted toward German wine. Most customers believed they were making completely independent choices. Yet something in the environment quietly pushed the odds in a particular direction. Now the question becomes harder to ignore. If invisible influences can shape our behavior without us noticing, how much of what we do is actually self-directed? The answer gets even stranger when we look at our opinions. Most people believe their beliefs come from careful reasoning, but psychologists have repeatedly found that humans often create explanations after making judgments. In some experiments, participants were asked to choose between nearly identical items. Without their knowledge, researchers secretly switched the selected item for a different one. Amazingly, many participants never noticed. Even more surprising, they confidently explained why they preferred the item they never actually chose. They weren't lying. They genuinely believed their explanation, which suggests something unsettling. Sometimes, the conscious mind behaves less like a decision maker and more like a press secretary. It explains decisions after they happen. So, if consciousness isn't always writing the script, who is? To answer that, we need to look beneath awareness itself. Your brain contains billions of neurons, processing information every second. Most of that activity never reaches conscious awareness. When you recognize a face, understand a sentence, or catch a ball, enormous computations happen behind the scenes. You only experience the final result. It's like seeing the headline without reading the entire article. And those hidden processes don't just handle simple tasks. They influence preferences, fears, motivations, and decisions. A hiring manager might believe they selected the best candidate because of qualifications. But factors as random as mood, fatigue, hunger, or the order of interviews can influence judgment. The conscious explanation sounds logical. The hidden causes may tell a different story. At this point, you might think the conclusion is obvious. So, free will is an illusion. Not necessarily. In fact, this is where the story takes its most important turn. Consider a chess player. Possible moves appear automatically. The player doesn't consciously generate every option, but they can evaluate those options, reject them, redirect them. Maybe freedom isn't about creating every thought from nothing. Maybe freedom exists in what happens next. You don't choose every impulse that enters your mind, but you can choose which impulses deserve attention. You don't choose every emotion, but you can influence how you respond to it. And that leads to the question that matters most. If hidden forces influence your decisions, how do you gain more control? The answer may be simpler than it sounds. Awareness. Advertisements work best when you don't notice them. Biases work best when they remain invisible. Habits are strongest when they run automatically. Awareness interrupts the script. The moment you recognize an influence, its power often begins to weaken. The more closely you observe your thoughts, environment, and patterns, the more opportunities you create to change them. And perhaps that's the real surprise. The goal isn't to become completely independent from biology, culture, emotion, or unconscious processes. No human can do that. The goal is to understand those forces well enough to participate in them, consciously. Because here's the idea worth remembering. You may not choose the first thought that enters your mind, but you can shape what happens after it arrives. And maybe that changes everything. Because if understanding your mind changes your choices, who do you become once you finally see how the system works?